Awesome. So we're 1 minute till 1 p.m. Hi everyone, my name's Ahmed and I'm a software engineer at Esri. Today for the DocuSign Hackathon, Esri is going to be talking about some of the APIs that you can use as well as the ArcGIS platform that you'll be able to integrate with your app and hopefully make some really cool hacks. So I'm going to wait till right at 1. I'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me. My name's Ahmed. I normally say Ahmed like Comet, but I feel like there's a couple of different pronunciations. But my preference is Ahmed. You can say Ahmed or Amit, but I'd go for Ahmed. I'm a software engineer at Esri under the special programs team under our professional services division. Not really sure what makes us special. I guess we're very special guys and we program, so that's probably why we're special programs. And, like most software engineers in the day-to-day, I am building software. Now, sorry, I'm getting some chats that there might be some screens not showing, so give me 1 second and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. And actually, if you are in the chat and watching, feel free to let me know if you can see everything. Otherwise, I'll feel very weird just talking into a mic without any associated. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. All right, so where we left off, I'm a software engineer, build software. Mostly the type of software I build are web applications and different data management software. My main languages are JavaScript, Python, and C#, but a lot of the different work that we do often makes us kind of go in between different domains, both in terms of languages, as well as the type of work we do. So sometimes I'm not even really focused too much on the software, but really just focus on building a solution and helping our clients and customers and the end users really find the solution they need for their business problem. And then the last part for those domains, it really is also a little bit all over the place, ranging from utilities, transportation, commercial, and banking. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about Esri's main platform. It's called ArcGIS. And if you're new to GIS, GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. So really anything that has some relationship to a place in the world is something called spatial data. So it's something associated with a space. And geographic information systems is really the connection of that information to its place in the world. What we do at Esri is we really help to build systems to help manage that, both in terms of hosting that information or data, as well as to uncover some of the insights of what does that data mean and really... Okay, is that any better? Perfect-ish, I guess. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, where I left off, we also build software outside of just web applications, but being able to also... I'll go back. Okay. Were we at 3D web or were we at 2D web? Or... I could do the intro thing. I really like my intro. Okay, so what I was talking about is I think the most pretty to look at visualizations are often our maps. So with this example, we have building footprints across from I think the early 1900s or late 1800s to modern day, and you can really see, it's a pretty cool visualization, but there's also a lot of meaning behind it. You can see the density of where those buildings are being made. You can see the change over time, and this is kind of one of the most, I think, attractive things about GIS, at least it was to me, of some of the really cool visualizations that you're able to make and how easy they are to make using our APIs. So from 2D visualizations, we also offer 3 visualizations. With this application, it's actually something that's just within browser, and you can see kind of all of this all of these different 3D models of the city of Paris are loaded in your browser and are relatively performant compared to, you don't need to have any external software installed. You can do, a measurement in your browser and be able to see how tall the Eiffel Tower is, or kind of what the view shed might be if you're standing right across the river from it. But outside of visualizations, we also do offer applications to help the people out in the field. So with the APIs that we build, a lot of them are also mobile-based or for native apps. So a lot of the people who are out there collecting the data, so whether or not it's a researcher who's trying to see how many types of grass might be in a particular area, or if you're just maybe just seeing if a light on your street is out and you need to go out there and maybe your Wi-Fi goes out, there's also offline capabilities for your mobile applications to help you understand and use and kind of interact with that GIS ecosystem as a whole. All right. And the next part is, once you've collected that data, and maybe you do want to visualize it too, you can also analyze it on a deeper level. So what we're seeing right here is Esri Notebooks, which is essentially just Jupyter Notebooks integrated with our Python APIs that allow you to access the data that you found and upload it to the ArcGIS platform and do different types of analysis. So maybe you need to understand how many different crime incidents are happening within a particular area. You would have the polygon, so the geographic area that you want to investigate, where those incidents happening, and then you'd also have another layer, which is just a data set of all the different incidents that are happening. And then what you could do is you could do an intersection analysis to see what are all the incidents that intersect that geographic area, and from there you can see, oh, it's this many, it's these types of incidents that can help you kind of understand that data without necessarily needing any associated visualization. For the example in this screenshot, you can see that there's a customer's feature layer as well as a trade area analysis web map. So maybe the example for this one was they're trying to see where's the best area that I can put a business site, or understanding the different demographics of customers within their trade areas. And outside of being able to manage your data, play with different geographic information systems, there's also something called the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World, which is essentially a massive library of all these different data sets that once you're on the ArcGIS platform, you have access to. So like as I'm scrolling down, you can see that, active hurricanes, World Traffic Service, all of these different and variable types of data are available for you to use. And some of them are different types of data, so you can see there's things called imagery layers, some are web maps. There's probably the one that I use the most is something called a feature layer. Yeah, you can see recent earthquakes right here, which is essentially, while we call them layers, you can think of them as like layers that you put on top of a map, but realistically what they are just different data sets. And when I say feature layer, you can think as a feature as a datum in that data set. So I'll take a look at the data inside of this recent earthquakes feature layer, and you can see that it's essentially just bringing a table up with all this associated information. So for this earthquake, you can see all of these different attributes. You can see the location, you can see the time it happened. There's probably some other stuff. Let's see the fields that we have for this earthquake. Yeah, alert level. And all of this information is readily available to you on the ArcGIS platform. So it really is a whole lot of different aspects tied together of, what really goes into managing and understanding your data. So I wanted to use this time to kind of get started into actively using the ArcGIS platform. I'm someone who really learns by doing, and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing or daunting to start learning a new platform. And just because of how many services and technologies are kind of available on the platform, I'm gonna go through a couple of examples that you might want to integrate in your application or the hack that you build. So I'm going to open up developers.arcgis.com. So I already created an account, and really this is kind of the landing page for where you can see all of the different things that are available for you through the platform. This is focused more towards the developers. If you also go to arcgis.com, which is more of the platform landing page, that's a little bit more directed towards people who are going to be doing less development intensive stuff and more interaction with the data. Maybe you're doing spatial analysis, maybe you're creating some of the maps. But both go hand in hand. If you are a developer, you're probably going to be using some of the resources that are available on ArcGIS Online. And then vice versa, you can build applications on ArcGIS Online using some online no-code app builders that allow you to kind of mitigate some of the confusing parts of development, the coding parts of development, and be able to just build your solutions rapidly and leverage what's available to you without having to know too much about the code. So once you create your account, there's actually a couple of different APIs. So one thing, let's go to get started, is we are pretty much all over the place well, not all over the place in a bad way, in the sense that we create a lot of different products and a lot of different development kits as well as APIs. So if you go to the Get Started page, you can see all of the different products or APIs that we have available, as well as the different types of solutions or problems that they're addressing. So I'm most comfortable with like JavaScript and Python, but one thing that's kind of the key behind all of these APIs is really the REST API. So you can almost think of all of these other APIs as almost a wrapper for the REST API. And the REST API is what allows us to really just create that raw connection to the data in terms of being able to access it, edit it, and manage it in a way that is accessible through our applications. Now, in the demos that I want to do today, there were actually 3 that I wanted to go through. So one being data visualization, being able to go through how to make a map and how to essentially just host it on the web, searching and geocoding, so essentially being able to look for places based off of what their name is and find their corresponding lat, long, or XY coordinate, and then lastly, a little bit of spatial analysis. So I did want to do this with some kind of live code too. So one thing I'm going to do is let me open up my Codepen starter app, which I have here. And what we're going to do is we're going to essentially just walk through what it's like to build an application using our APIs. So for this example, what we're going to do is essentially just build a map, and then using some information that we're loading from ArcGIS Online, so a particular layer, what we'll be doing is loading that layer into our map and building essentially a simple application that just has a map on a page pointing to a place. So I'm using something called Codepen, which is essentially an online IDE. I really like it because it has this live view that you can get some really cool feedback from right away. And then what you'll see is that there's actually 3 editors here. There's an HTML one, a CSS one, and a JavaScript one. For this demo, I'm essentially going through some of our tutorials, and they do put all of kind of the associated information, so like the HTML and head tags. But I think typically what you'll see in Codepen is that a lot of people load the stuff using the UI of Codepen. So if you want to add your own CSS or JavaScript, you can load them using Codepen. But ignoring that for now, this might be something you're more accustomed to if you are building an application. So right here you can see that I'm loading 2 things, the main Esri CSS as well as our the reference to our JavaScript API, and I've just created a new script tag. Now, when I create this application, there's actually a couple of modules that I need to load from the JavaScript API. So you can see that there's 2 coded out right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this and just have that like empty require block right here. And you can see that I'm importing two modules, this Esri map and Esri views MapView. So they are a little bit kind of properly named. This is corresponding to something that would be a map, and this would be a particular view of that map. So maybe on our map, you're looking at it in a different subset of what information you want to see. So you can find more about the JavaScript API. So if I just go to ArcGIS JavaScript API and find the docs for it, you can see a list of all the different modules that are available for the API. And a lot of them do overlap between the different APIs that we have. So you'll see similar paradigms between our JavaScript API to our Python API. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is kind of underneath what's going on in the API is a reference to the REST API, or they're using the REST API to manage the information that's going on. So if I go to the API reference of the ArcGIS API JavaScript, I'll be able to see all of the different classes that are available through the API. So you can see right at the top we have map, MapView, and SceneView. If I want to learn a little bit more about what the map module does and what it is, I just need to go to that site. Apologize if my internet's a little bit slow. Streaming is devouring my internet. But you can see here that once it's loaded, there's all of this information associated with what does this map class do? What are the different capabilities of it, as well as the different examples to how you can implement it and the associated classes with it. So you can see that. See also MapView. Okay, let's learn a little bit more about what our MapView is. So they put it a little bit better. A map view displays a 2D view of a map instance. And when you think of a view, I would just think of it as almost as like a different perspective that you want to see the map of. Maybe the map itself is kind of the foundation of what you're going to be seeing, but then a view might be a perspective that you see some of the information from. So going back to the application, let's go ahead and start with just making it an instance of a map on our application. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that. And you can see that there's one property here, base map topo vector. And actually, before I do that, save and run. Hopefully we should see a map here. Or not. Oh, just kidding. Not yet. What we need to do is also instantiate the map view. But as I mentioned, there's this base map property, which is essentially saying that for the context in which we're going to be setting all of our other data, we want to see it against a topographic vector map. So topographic is mostly just like being able to see the contour lines of the elevation, and then vector is kind of a type of geospatial data, which is, I guess you could say it's more discrete ways to represent geospatial data. I would Google that one because it's not too hard, but I probably won't explain it that well. So you can see that in the other class that we created, the map view, there's another set of other properties. So you can see that there's this container, which is pointing to this view div. And if I scroll up just a little bit, you can see, or actually scroll down, in our body, we have this div tag with the ID of view div. And also, if you have any questions, go ahead and send a message to me or post it in the chat if I'm skipping over anything or if I could clarify anything either. But you can see here that, going back to where we were, we just have a simple tag, a div tag with the ID of view div, and we're saying that for our map view, we want to instantiate it inside of this container of the view div. And you can see that it's really taking up the entire space because in our CSS we say we want its height and width of that view div to take up the entire space of our window. The next couple things you see, map, we're referencing our map, object, and the center and zoom. The center is pointing to a set of latitude and longitude, so essentially the coordinates of where we want the map to be centered on, as well as the zoom is corresponding to the zoom level. So if I change this to 1, save and run, we'll see that the zoom level has changed and that the extent of the map has changed. So you can see that it's much further out than we used to be. So if I change it back to, let's say, 19, we'll see the opposite effect of, instead of zooming further out, we'll be zooming a little bit further in. All right. So I'm going to keep it at 13 for now because that did seem like a good medium for being able to see something a little bit more meaningful on the map. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and add some data from ArcGIS Online and associate it with the put it on the map so we can see it. So right now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add a layer of parks to the map. So if I go to ArcGIS Online, sign in, and let me use the account I just created. One sec. Okay. I'll be able to log in using that developer account to ArcGIS Online. And once I'm logged in, it'll bring me to this organization that, as I created my developer account, it'll create kind of a org for you, which is essentially the environment in which you can see all of your own personal information and the content that you create. So if I go to the content tab, you can see that as it loads, all of the information or layers, datas, maps that I create will be shown on this page. So give it 1 second. Now, I don't have any items here, but if I did want to create something, you can click that create button and see all the different options that are available to you. So as I mentioned, layers are essentially just data sets of, if I wanted to create a feature layer, you could think of me creating a new data set. And when I create a new feature layer, I have all of these templates that I can use to maybe structure some of the data. So these templates are based off of like common use cases. I'm not going to create a new one right now. I'm actually going to use an existing one, and I'm going to find that existing one on the Living Atlas. So I have a ID for the item that I want to use, but let's say I didn't have the ID and I just wanted to explore some of the data that's available. You'll also be able to see it here, as well as going directly to the Living Atlas site. So I'm searching, let's see, trails. Well, not sure where it will be. Let me try this, and I'm just gonna modify ID. All right, so this is a feature layer that was made for this tutorial. It's essentially, if I open this up in our map viewer, a set of all the different trailheads in that area on the map. And just for reference, that's like the Malibu-ish kind of area. Change it back to 13. Run. Oops. What I did was I just opened up that layer in the map viewer, which is essentially just a quick way that we can see what that feature layer looks like on a map. And we're essentially going to be recreating a very similar view of once we have the ID for this feature layer, we can bring it into our own application. So let's say you were building your own application and you wanted to host some spatial data. What you would do is you'd go to ArcGIS Online, create a new feature layer, or upload your data and convert it to a feature layer. And then you would have that reference to that item that you created and be able to integrate it with your application, which is what we're going to do right now. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to import a new class called layer. So Esri / layer / oops. All right. And essentially what I'm doing is, since we want to have this layer on our map, is I'm just going to be adding that layer, or instantiating a new class of a layer using the ID that I had for that item on Portal. So it might be a little bit easier if I show you. So if I go down here and I do var trail, oops, trail, oops, head, portal item, and I'll do layer, so using that class, and then I'm going to use a function called from portal item. So our portal is essentially ArcGIS Online. ArcGIS does have kind of two different ways to, I guess, store data. So there's ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. ArcGIS Online is like the more cloud-based one, and ArcGIS Enterprise is for, I guess, companies that want to self-host or manage their data a little bit more intensively than just with ArcGIS Online. So what I'm going to do now is, let's go back to our reference, layers, we go to our layer class, and we're going to use a couple, actually I think we're just going to use one property, and that's going to be referencing the ID of the feature layer that we have. So I'm going to look at some of the properties, but then let's see if we can find the method that I'm using too. So I use from portal item. There we go. Like that. And you can see that for the parameters that we're providing to the from portal item is that pretty much it's just a portal item. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And actually what that looks like is portal item. And then, oops, portal item. I'm passing in an ID for it. And the ID that I'm passing in, oops, is going to be the ID for this layer. So let's go back here. And that should be it. Now, right now we're not going to see anything reflected in the map because we just instantiated this layer. We didn't really do anything with it yet. So now let's add it to the map. Okay. Now, this is probably not the best way, but it is the most readable way that you can add a layer to the map. So I'm going to do map, the map instance that we just created. I'm going to do add, and I'm going to say trail head portal item. Might do that. Run. See if that works. It's loading. It's loading. Darn. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything happened, but that's okay. So actually, oh, there it is. You can see that it did load, just a little bit delayed, but that actually makes sense into what I was about to talk about. Of when you do reference these layers, a request is made to the layer to where it's still pending it to load. So you can think of it kind of being different or disparate requests being made to the base map, to the layer, and as each one loads, as you get the response from each request, they're added to the map so we can start seeing them. So that one looked pretty easy to me, and you can see that already that if I changed my view to, let's say, the live view, that we'd now be able to see our first application, which is just a simple map with all the trailheads in like the Malibu, Santa Monica Mountains area as it loads. Hey, we got it. All right. So that's a very, very simple example of kind of what data visualization looks like using some of our APIs. We walked through a couple of concepts. We walked through ArcGIS Online, what a layer is, which is essentially just a data set. ArcGIS Online is a place that has a lot of these layers, as well as other tools like the map viewer we saw to see what that data looks like. We've now been able to reference an item using the JavaScript API, and once we instantiate that layer based off of that ArcGIS Online item, you're able to see kind of the connections between when you create your own application, a little bit the integration of your own application with ArcGIS Online and the data that's hosted on ArcGIS Online. So that's a very, very kind of high level walkthrough and kind of run through of how you can start visualizing, at least on a somewhat basic level, some of the data that you use, whether or not it's hosted on ArcGIS Online, or if it's just a layer that maybe you want to instantiate the data with at the time that the client loads. But now you can go ahead and start making as many maps as you want to. A couple other things to note is that you have a bunch of other properties that you can manage. So like you can manage the base map. So if I change this to, let's actually see, what are some of the other base maps that are available to us? 1 second. You can customize kind of what the map looks like in terms of what each layer looks like. When you do want to visualize your data, you want to think about what's the most meaningful way that we can help people understand what they're seeing, because sometimes there can be just like a lot of points on a map and you might not be able to understand it. And that's one thing that, if this loads, that you can kind of already see here on the map of, rather than representing each trailhead with a different point, is that they have a little icon of a tiny person with a backpack and a walking stick that suggests that it's probably something more along the lines of hiking. So if you were to add other layers to this map, that you'd be able to contextualize what the meaning of these different points were based off of what symbols you use to represent them. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Thank you, Callie. All right. So now that we have some basic information of layers, how we can make a map, let's take another, way that we can use that data. So what I'm going to do now is go over to the searching and geocoding aspect. So this was one thing that's very directly relevant to the challenges. And it's actually pretty straightforward of how you can do geocoding. Either you can do that using JavaScript too, but I'll show you how you can do it with Python in case it might just be a service that you might want to make, or you just might need to geocode some data set right from the start. But I'll show you how you can do that using the Python API. Oh no. Let me refresh. I think I might have logged out and logged in. Okay, let me get out of here. Just go to notebooks.esri.com. And if you've ever used Jupyter Notebooks, that's essentially what this is, except you get access to the ArcGIS Python APIs right off the bat. All right, and so what I did, I just created a new notebook. And actually one thing that I was realizing kind of as I was loading was kind of the term geocoding too. It can be a little bit complex of like, what does that even mean? But essentially the idea behind it is that when we talk and when we communicate places, we don't say their coordinates. We have some representation of, whether or not it's an address. You can say, I live at 380 New York Street in Redlands, California. I don't live there, I work there, but what does that really mean in terms of translating that address into a spot in the world? So that's what geocoding is it takes some representation of a location and transform that essentially into XY coordinates, but into something that's a little bit more standardized to being able to find it on a map. So what I'm going to do is essentially use the Esri Geocoding service to translate an address into its corresponding XY coordinates. And I'm going to be doing this using Python. One second. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is import a couple libraries. Oops. So this first one, GIS. I'm importing like the GIS module, which I'll explain a lot of these after, but essentially that's kind of the reference to the data that, or I guess the system in which these calculations would be happening. I'm going to import a couple of the geocoding libraries. Oops. Code, and I'll start with just one. And I'm going to, actually I'll start with just that for now. So I imported two libraries, GIS and Geocode. Daytime module. I'm going to ignore that for now. Not sure what that is. But normally I don't think you should be seeing that. I think it's just a reference inside of one of these libraries that might be deprecated, and it's just warning you about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to instantiate something of the GIS class. So when I run that, I guess we don't really see anything. Let's see what it looks like. You can see that it has, by default, a reference to arcgis.com. So essentially ArcGIS Online. If you did have maybe your own hosted version, so your own ArcGIS Enterprise, you'd be able to pass in parameters here of what your username and password and the URL to that GIS might be. But since I didn't pass in anything, it's just defaulting to arcgis.com. All right. So what I'm going to start with is just using the geocoder to do that first example that I mentioned of getting a address into a point or into a feature, really. And to reiterate, a feature is essentially a datum in a geographic data set. So you could think of it back to the earthquakes. One feature would be one earthquake. So for now, what we're going to be getting is a list of places. Actually, I'm going to say code response equal to. Sorry, I'm using another screen for reference. And we're going to pass in for our parameters an address. So I'm going to pass in the address 380 New York Street, which is Esri's address. And then I'm going to add another parameter of as feature set, which is essentially saying that in our response, once we geocode this, let's get it as a set of different features. And let's execute this. Looks like it works. And let's take a look at what that geocode response actually looks like. Geocode response, did I spell it wrong? Yes. We can see it has a feature set of 20 features. Now, that's not too meaningful to us. Let's take a look at some of the properties underneath of that geocode response. So I'm going to look at the features property of our response. And you can see it's this massive blob of all these different places. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio so we can kind of format it and see what does this response actually mean. It's the slowest I've seen Visual Studio Code open. Okay. One thing we might be able to do is open it in Codepen if we already have it open. But oops. Okay. So what I did was I just opened up a new window, Visual Studio Code. I'm gonna go ahead and change it to be a JSON. It is actually just a Python array, but I'm just doing this so we can format it. No, I do not. Okay, let me try something else. I think I have to save it. When I save, view format. Format selection. Let's see if that helps us. Oh, I guess that is a formatted view for us. Not super helpful. Okay, let me clean it up just a little bit manually. So you can see that we have an array of all these different dictionaries. So the two top level properties of these dictionaries are geometry and attributes. So it kind of cleans it up a little bit. Let's see if I can use a formatter now. Okay, there we go. At least this second one was formatted. But you can see that we have these two top level properties, and let me actually minimize it so it's a little bit less kind of line heavy to read. We have this geometry and these attributes. The geometry is referring to the actual place that we have. So, oops. We have our XY coordinates as well as this thing called a spatial reference, which for now I wouldn't worry too much about. I think those actually might be like famous last words because I have definitely worried a lot about spatial references, but essentially a spatial references is kind of pointing to the way that you're projecting your map and the type of projection you're using. I would also Google that because I'm probably going to explain that wrong. So we have that in our geometry dictionary, and then we also have this attributes property. And this attributes property is essentially all of the information that's associated with this location. So you can see that the type of place it is, it's a locality. I'm not sure what a lot of these things are, but you can see that there's probably some associated information with that location. And we were able to get this all just by doing geocode this, or calling this geocode function and passing in this address argument. So we're able to get all these different places that are associated to 380 New York Street. Now, one thing I'm kind of curious about is if I put in Redlands, California, will that work? So we now have 2 features instead of 20, and you can see that we're getting a little bit closer to the place, and it probably might include like different ways that the same place might be categorized. Of maybe one might be I don't know, at a higher granularity than the other, and that's maybe why we're seeing 2 features of the same place, since they probably are corresponding to the same thing here. And so that's how geocoding essentially works. There's a service behind the scene called the ArcGIS World Geocoding Service that when we call this function, our Python API is essentially wrapping a reference to the ArcGIS REST API with that ArcGIS World Geocoding Service. And behind the scenes, there's some really smart people who made that function, but all we need to worry about is that we have a place and that we're able to send it in to that geocoder and get the features as something that's a little bit more standardized in terms of what these XY coordinates are, as well as it looks like there's a whole lot of associated attribute information with that address. So far what we've seen is being able to geocode as well as create a map. The other thing that I did want to show, and it does look like I am coming a little bit close to time, is some of the search aspects of some of the JavaScript API. But I think one thing that might be actually better, or kind of on top of looking into searching, which is essentially the same idea of kind of like partial match geocoding, of being able to like type in a place of, like on Google Maps, I shouldn't say Google Maps, on Esri Navigator, when you partially type in a place and you can get a list of all the different auto completions of what that place might be referred to. That's another thing that we also have both as a module in the JavaScript API, but let's say you don't want to get too heavy in the code, you can also use one of our app builders, which is one of the other things that I wanted to show. I know that for this hackathon, there's also like 3 separate challenges, but then you get like a collaboration, or there is a collaboration awarded if you're able to complete however many challenges and integrate them all into one application. Granted, I don't know, like, I often do seem like a lot of really cool things that are created in these hackathons, but one thing that is probably the biggest, I think, constraint with hackathons is going to be the time constraint. So, it's only going to be a couple weeks long, that maybe you won't have enough time as an individual or team to do all of the different challenges, and you might want to default to prioritizing one challenge over the other, but that's only if you're thinking of it in terms of having to develop from scratch, or maybe not leverage or bootstrap some of the available technologies to solve some of those problems. So that's what I'm going to show right now, is tying this to the search aspects of some tools that are readily available through ArcGIS Online to create an application where you can search for particular places. And really, when you compare it to kind of the amount of time it would take you to build that from scratch, or like even using the, I'm saying scratch as if you were using the API, but like even if you weren't using the API, this would be a pretty intensive task to build a geocoder. So even if you didn't want to use the API, there are tools available to you to create solutions without having to get too far into the code. And they have a lot of capabilities to what some of the COTS functionality of these applications are. So I'm going to go ahead and let me actually redo that. I'm in the wrong organization. Let me sign out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new application using something called the ArcGIS Web App Builder, which, as it suggests, it's essentially a builder, a no-code app builder that helps you bootstrap applications with a variety of different functionalities. And we actually have a newer version called Experience Builder. I think Web App Builder might be a little bit easier to show just because some of the functionalities are kind of specific in terms of what types of use cases they would have. But let me go ahead and log in again. So you might be able to use Web App Builder or one of our other app builders. There's also a product we have called App Studio that you might be able to leverage in tackling other or maybe some of the challenges that you might not be prioritizing in terms of the technical resources you want to dedicate to solving that problem. So as this loads, we'll be loaded into hopefully my content organization page, and then I'll go to the content tab right at the top, and create a new web app builder. So I'm going to call this my first web app. And we'll add a tag, test app. Alright, so once I create that here, it's going to load me into the actual ArcGIS web app builder app. Alright. It's coming along. Okay, and you can see kind of right off the bat, because we are focused on our spatial data, that the main focus point of the application is going to be the map. And you can customize the different way that this application can look using some of the built-in themes. So if I change it to the jewelry box theme, you'll see that now there's a panel on the left-hand side, and the map shifted over a little bit. I can change the themes of it. But really the power and kind of the main functionalities of building applications using the web app builder are found within the widgets. So a widget is really just a set or a module of something that does a different aspect of managing or interacting with some of the geospatial data that you might have. So actually, even before I do that, one thing that I might want to do is select a particular map that I want to have in here. So I haven't created any maps with this account, but if I go to the public and look on ArcGIS Online, maybe we can reference some other map that's been made already. I wonder if there's an earthquakes map. This one looks kind of interesting. Let's see the 2010 population, senior population in the US. And once again, these are some maps that are available on the Living Atlas of the world that are publicly available, and you can see what data. But I'm just loading them into this map for now so we can see kind of the capabilities that we can have with the widgets interacting with the map. Okay, there we go. And I wanted to focus particularly on the search widget. So the search widget is powered by behind the scenes. Let me go to our old API, a module called search, which is, and actually before I do that, let me just show you how the search works. If we type in that same address, 380, oops. All right, 380 New York Street. You can see that one, it's listing kind of all of these potential locations for what 380 New York Street might be, but when we click on it, it actually also zooms to that particular location. So it not only knows kind of the different options that are available, it also knows the actual location of that particular place. And when we go behind the scenes, so this is that search widget. If I click this configure this widget button, we can see that there's different search sources, and this one is referencing the geocoder for the ArcGIS World Geocoding service. But I can add my own individual search sources. So you can see on the map that we have these different states. Let's say I want to go on the county level, and essentially this county is referring to a layer that's in our map. So if I click OK, then our geocoder not only will go against the ArcGIS World Geocoding service, it'll also use our feature layer as a source to do the same type of process of whatever we type into that search box will be searched against the attributes of the features that we have in that feature layer. So let's say our county name, and it'll be able to see that this county has a name attribute equal to San Bernardino County. And from there, we'll be able to not only find that corresponding county, we'll also be able to zoom to the extent of that county. I don't know if my computer froze. if it did freeze, that is good timing since I am roughly over. But I genuinely don't know if it did freeze. Alright. I'm not sure how many people are still viewing, but I did just cut out from my computer crashing a little bit when we did start making a web app. Let's see if it's still in my content. I do just want to record this last part just in case anyone does want it for reference. But where we were was just including a little bit of modification to the search widget so that you could include geocoding searching against a particular feature layer that's in your map. Alright, so we can start back from where we left off, and I apologize, I think I had too many tabs open and Twitch just consuming all my memory. Okay, let's see if we can do it. Let's see if we can do it. Alright, I trust in my computer. Let's edit this application. And also, if there's any audio issues, like last time, feel free to point them out in the messages so it's not just a echoey broadcast. Alright, my fingers are crossed. Alright, things are okay. Okay, I think it did crash when we did configure the search widget to point to a feature layer. And honestly, I do think the data might have been partially a factor in, because I think it was all of the different counties, states, tracks, and block groups throughout the US, which is kind of a lot of data, but let's see, maybe we can do a smaller data set. If I can find one real fast. Population pressure looks interesting, but I don't know what that means. Let's see. Okay. I do like that picture. Traffic counts. Let's do USA congressional districts. Should be something a little bit more manageable for us in terms of my computer being able to handle it. But it looks like maybe that web map might not be updated. So, alright, I think we're just going to have to go back to senior in 2010. Oh, maybe let's do housing with mortgages. That seems like a cool data set. Awesome. Alright, so going back to the search widget, I'm configuring the widget now to point to the layers in this map. So when I click add search source and then feature layer, what's happening is that it's seeing here's all the different layers that are inside of this USA census mortgage housing map. But and you can see that it's essentially just the same data, just categorized by different levels of, I guess, specificity. So from the state level to the county level to track and block group. So let's say I only want to do, okay, I want to do state because I think that's definitely a small data set and it should not cause any issues. I'm going to configure the search field to look, let's see, against the name. They don't have the name of the state? Maybe GO, state name. So essentially, these are all the different attributes that are available on that feature layer of percent mortgage house by state. And I'm going to click OK. And what I'm going to do now is click OK here. And our search widget has now been configured to have the percent mortgage housing by state. So when I look up state, oh, not state. When I look up a state, okay. So I need to show the name in the display field, but if we go to Arizona and I click 04, it should zoom us to the map should be zoomed to Arizona, and we can see some of the related information. So it looks like there's a pop-up configured on this map that not only are we seeing the geography, the selection of Arizona, we also get to see some associated information of here in Arizona, housing owned with the mortgage or loan represents 39.8% of the total number of housing units in the state. Which, hey, I didn't know that before, so I'm glad that I could configure the search widget to search for Arizona and see the housing by type of ownership in Arizona. All right, so that's the search widget, and you can explore more about ArcGIS Web App Builder to see what are the capabilities, the functionality of all these different widgets. If I just click choose widget, you can see that there's a breadth of a whole bunch of different widgets available for you to see and use. And a lot of them are very configurable to different use cases. So maybe you want to do some geospatial analysis, there's a tool for that. If you want to edit your data in a map, there's a tool for that. And it's really all about building the solution that addresses your problem and finding the best combination of widgets and configurations of those widgets to build that solution. So that's one tool that you can leverage in case you do prioritize maybe one application or one solution and don't have too much time for the other ones, but still want to get like that actually, I think the collaboration prize was different teams working together. But hey, if you want to save time, then you should use the Web App Builder. Anyway, that's pretty much a very, very brief primer to the ArcGIS platform, some of the tools that are available, some of the APIs that are available. You can do a whole bunch of things from data visualization to searching to geocoding, spatial analysis, even like routing and directions are all different services that are available through the ArcGIS platform. And the best way for you to start is just to go to developers.arcgis.com. And there's a whole bunch of different tutorials that are there that will be able to guide you through and also expose you to different ways and ideas that can address some of the problems that you might want to be addressing in your hack. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it if you watch this broadcast. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Slack channel. But thank you so much.